Thanks for staying with us tonight. Now, this week, the country saw steep petrol price increases, which will have wide-ranging ramifications for a number of sectors. The supply chain industry is among the sectors that will be hardest hit by these latest increases. We're joined by the Professional Body for Supply Chain Management Director, MJ Schoemaker. MJ, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. Firstly, let's talk about how supply chain will be affected by this.
Good evening, Kathy, and to all the viewers. I think the most obvious thing that everyone thinks about is the fact that, the logistics companies, the trucks that are delivering goods, they will have to pay more for their diesel. And I think what's underestimated in all of this is the fact that the average order cost in a production cycle is actually going to be impacted. So from the raw material, collecting the raw material, then you have to transport it to your production site. You then have to produce it. You might be using diesel for your production. You then have to transport it to a distribution center and then into the shop. So that average cost is going to increase. If I may, I'd like to give you an example, maybe in the agricultural industry, because we're talking about fuel, but we actually should be looking at the crude oil price. So crude oil will impact the agricultural industry even more because fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, they're all derivatives of crude oil. So that means even the price for that will go up. Plus the farmers would have to then use diesel on their farms. They would have to transport the goods. So it has a very wide effect on the supply chain, right from the raw material to the shelf.
It's such an important issue that you raise, and we've already had the agricultural industry come out and say that South Africa needs to start looking at alternatives, even when it comes to perhaps the local manufacturing of some of these fertilizers, because we certainly do have all that we need in order to produce it locally. But I suppose on the issue just of the diesel, we've also seen them go out and talk about the diesel rebate. Do you think that that would be a solution, or at least a temporary solution to this challenge?
I certainly think it would be a temporary solution. Any kind of rebate, obviously they'd have to be decided at the government levels. But if we look at South Africa as a whole, the rand is quite strong at the moment. If you look at the exports, the commodity prices have gone up. So 60% of South Africa's exports are commodities, and only 20% of their imports are oil. So if you look at that, there's actually quite a good balance there. So I'm always trying to find a silver lining somewhere in this hike of petrol. Obviously, for the people on the ground, it's all of us, we fill our tanks and we go, oh my God. But I think there's a lot of positive elements as well that I think the government needs to manage well, and then they would be able to potentially do that type of rebate for the diesel, certainly.
Of course, this kind of problem hits us at a time where our rail infrastructure has been facing its own set of challenges, and due to those, the movement of goods via rail hasn't been as efficient as it should be. How much does that compound or add to the problem?
No, absolutely, Kathy. I mean, rail would be the first thing that we would think of would be the most efficient way of moving goods around, and then only having the truck come to the station where that train stops. And unfortunately, the reality in South Africa is that the rail system is poor, and that I would say the majority of transportation on the roads is through trucks, through freight. And they would also have to push through a surcharge, or a petrol or a diesel surcharge through to the customer. So until just infrastructure alone is something that we've known this for a long time, and now things are catching up with us, and it's urgent now that we should be looking at our rail, because the infrastructure actually of the rail, how it's laid at the moment, is actually really good. It just needs to be maintained.
Let's talk about the conversations then that you as an industry are having about these increases and potential responses.
Yes, so we've had a lot of disruption, right? It's not just the increase in petrol. We've had the whole COVID. We have the war now. So businesses that are really looking to cope with what is going on at the moment, and this is also a disruption, just like any other. I would hope that they have some sort of plan in place where they already did a risk assessment to see, okay, if the crude oil price goes up, have we been monitoring that? What is the impact on our business? And many businesses are going to have to really think very carefully about producing in a very efficient way. So not producing big volumes because it's cheaper, because it won't be cheaper. You should be producing what the market needs. That means you need to use some sort of intelligence, whether it's analysis, using good software to find out what does the market need. And I think one of the concerns as well, and a challenge will be, is that many companies might be struggling with cash flow. And when a company struggles with cash flow, they cannot produce as much as they would like to. So therefore, there might also be a challenge of some scarcity, or that the prices increase even more because people want something that's not available. So companies really need to look at themselves and say, have I prepared myself for this? Have I learned my lesson? And do I have the tools in place that I can react very quickly? We prefer to anticipate things, so we would try and anticipate the price increase of crude oil. But at the moment, because of this volatility in that VUCA world we're living in, we have to react. But we should already be doing scenarios. Companies should have already done it, all the different scenarios, to say, these are the scenarios that potentially will happen. What are we going to do when it happens? And that is how they're going to manage this.
One of the biggest impacts that we saw under COVID-19 when it came to the disruption of supply chain also happened to be in the construction sector, where a lot of projects had to be put on hold because there was just simply a lot of difficulty in getting the products that were needed from elsewhere in the world. When you think about what the impact of the current increases might be, especially to goods that are not sourced locally, what are some of your projections?
One thing I think is again, and I've said it before, I think on one of your programs, is that people mustn't panic. I don't think we're going to run out of food or anything like that, but food is going to cost more. And that is going to impact people in the low, medium, middle income part of South Africa. And that's where, again, with these rebates, this is a really good idea, because then we can at least try and counter these costs. The transportation, if you look at the taxis having to get to work every day, people that work in an industry where they can Zoom and where they can have remote workplaces will go back to that. And that will impact, if you're talking about building, that's going to impact a lot of the property market that are commercial, because people are not going to be in the office anymore. So it's quite a serious situation. I don't think we should all panic at all, but we must brace ourselves because obviously if someone has to fill the tank of petrol, they're going to have less to spend in the shop, and then they're going to find that the prices go up. If I can just give you a little bit of, to keep it a little bit relative, if the petrol price goes up by 10% in the retail space, you will find that in the prices in the retail will go up around 12%. That's just for them to be able to produce the goods and get the goods to where they need to be. And then you'll have an approximate another 5% for the distribution as well. So you have to reckon each 10%, you are looking at a potential price increase of around 15% in the shop.
Thanks for that, MJ. Really appreciate your insights. And she is with the Professional Body for Supply Chain Management and is the director there.